Welcome everyone back to Poets Time. It was so lovely getting my class of, it's not a class, it's a lovely group of poets together. And we've had a long break, and it was also nice to suggest that we start doing some recording of poets that are in the group and poets that are out in the world. This group I have been working with for a long time, and the man that I've got to introduce you to tonight is a man I've known maybe for a good few years. I met him at a university class. Very impressed with his intellect, his humour, his just way of being in the world and the way of making the other people in the group feel really comfortable. He had a charm about him for that. And we then worked at maybe giving people the idea how they might go about publishing their own work. It's very difficult. And although I've got a small publishing house, I can't do everything and I couldn't do everyone. So I thought the best way forward is to give people some hints, and it's a wee bit instruction about how they might put their own book together. And certainly Johnny has done this. He's brought his own book out and he's going to show you that, and he's going to read some wonderful poems for it from the book. Please welcome Johnny Woods.
Thank you very much for that very flattering, warm welcome, Linda. Thank you. Now, I'm going to, my specs will be on and off during the course of this interview, but I'm going to read two poems first and talk a bit about them. So without further ado, the first one is called Remember Grenfell. Maybe the only bit of introduction is people of a reasonable age will remember Joyce Grenfell, who was, I suppose, briefly you could summarize as a national treasure back in the day. But it's a more serious poem than that, and it's called Remember Grenfell. Remember Grenfell, the quintessential voice of comfort and joy. We sat by the fire, we sat by the wireless, our jumpers woolly and warm. We waited, wireless crackling, for Joyce's voice, the nursery sketch. Mary, listen carefully, and Peter, pay attention please. Listen to teacher, listen with mother. No ifs, ands or buts, we learnt when told, children, stay put. Remember Grenfell, the quintessential, residential, multicultural, vertical village of neglect and joy. Fire crackling, most waited, jumpers were few. Grenfell heard one voice. Mohammed, Mehdi, Mary, listen very carefully, stay put. Amal, Abdulaziz, pay attention please, stay put. Ernie, Ali, Gary, Nadia, Maria, Gloria, Gloria. That was Remember Grenfell, and I will now move on to another poem called Something You Want to Forget. I'll just read the epithet, which I think explains where it came from. Something You Want to Forget. Under house arrest in 1999, the former Chilean military dictator, Augusto Pinochet, received a gift from an old friend. Meditation is sort of deep thought. Though fraught with danger as given time and no effort, your mind rewinds, leaving you to wish you hadn't been inclined to stretch yourself so. Instead, you watch Pointless. Watching Pointless is, of course, pointless as usually you're too hungry early evening to concentrate on contestants, Salvador and Sally, this evening discussing the finer pointless points of Augusto Pinochet. Peckish and guilty, you spend your mind-bending time reading The History of Surrealism. Sally can wait. But your mind rewinds. There's something about Pinochet, something you wish to remember, something you want to forget, in a complex ambivalence that puts you in mind of surrealism. Maybe not pointless if you see randomness hand in hand with hidden order, what's called objective chance. What is it good for? Good question, you think, as you close the history of surrealism, dip your first chili crisp and unmute the pointless presenter. Your eyes meet his as you double dip. You remember, it's the bit you wish to forget. The gift from Mrs. T to the murderous General P. A single malt whiskey. Too slow with the remote, you hear him quote the Iron Lady. Scotch is one British institution that will never let you down.
Wow. Wow. Two very, very powerful poems, Johnny. And, you know, one of the things I wonder, I know that your background is in psychiatry before you retired, and quite often your poems are working at different mind levels, almost sleepy, dreamy. You know, it doesn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise when I look at, I've read most of your poetry, I think, and there's always that kind of levels of consciousness, focus, and mind bending, you know, things you want to forget, things that will always surface. I wondered if you wanted to say anything about whether or not your background in psychiatry and thinking about the way people's minds work, can you see how that influences your own writing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not really sure. I think during my working life, I suppose I met so many people in so many difficult situations without sounding too pleased with myself. It taught me not to judge anyone, to take your time before you jump to conclusions. And also working with the elderly and a lot of people with very hard times and disadvantage and unequal opportunities, it gave me, I like to think, a strong sense of what's right in life and what's injustice. And I think I'm now, of course, thinking of the Grenfell one, the Grenfell tragedy, that I wrote that through a sort of anger through the double tragedy of them having the grief at the time, and then the double grief of the long protracted inquiry after it. And the enjoyment, if you can enjoy talking about a tragedy, was the play on words with Joyce Grenfell, and that linked in together.
I think that was a brilliant thing you did there with that, the passivity, you know, the children listening, like the mother thing, sit down and listen. And then the way you brought that to these, like Mohammed, Gary, Ali, being forced not to move and to stay where they are in a ridiculous situation that actually obviously caused their death. I thought that was, the parallels there were very cleverly drawn, because the beginning of that poem, there is a kind of slight nostalgic poignancy about us remembering, but then obviously the title, Remember Grenfell, Grenfell will forever be what happened now. You know, Joyce Grenfell's long gone now, in terms of, so you, but when you bring that back to us, and then children doing what they're told, even if it brings the end for them, I thought, yeah. And also what you say about justice, I do see that, and it's not, I think, you being, I know you, and I think there is a strong sense of justice, which is in many of your poems, and certainly is in the second one also, you know, about, there's a sense of guilt in that, you know, and the contrast with pointless Pinochet, you know, that people being passive, you know, on the couch, the double dipping of the chili crisp, and then the memory comes. So it's that kind of, we're sanguine in our lives, even at the time. And I think when you bring the memory back about Mrs. Thatcher and the bottle of whiskey, Did you do you feel sometimes a sense of, which came across in that, just you can't do anything about things, but you feel bad about it or guilty about it?
I think that's true, because I think I'm not alone in sometimes feeling, well, feeling a sort of impotence. Well, what have I done? I've written a poem, and I've had a sort of guilty enjoyment of spending the time putting it together and putting it out there. But I suppose it must, collectively, poetry must have a force for good. And I found myself more recently writing about Ukraine, and you get drawn to these things.
You're a
And the
witness,
subject,
you're bearing witness. And the thing is, we're at a certain age, we're of a certain mentality. It's not just age-wise, but we're not going to strike up and stake out, So what can you do? I mean, when you watch politicians making such a mess of it, I think what poets can do is bear witness in their writing. But maybe as you say, that was interesting. You see there's a strange enjoyment just getting something completed and feeling a sense of achievement. But what you're writing about is a huge reminder for people, lest they forget.
yeah, yes, I think going back to your earlier point, I wouldn't claim to have through medical training or psychiatric training, have a greater understanding of human nature. But what I think the main thing that drives me or forges what I write is personal experience, or what you can identify with. Two awful tragedies, Hillsborough and Grenfell, really sort of haunted me a bit, because we've all been up in high flats, or lived in them, or visited people. We've all been to football matches, and I think that just feels so very. It makes a big impact. And one of the fascinations in poetry is how, when you've got time and you're retired and you're trying to write poetry, it's almost randomly memories come back to you. I was down in the sort of London area, and drove past something, and I asked my brother, what was that all about? I said, oh, that's all demonstrations outside the private hospital that Pinochet's in. And I think the fascination, or the beauty, the enjoyment of writing poetry, the flip side is the frustration, is sometimes that memory just jumps in your head, and you think, and that leads to something else, and you can link it up, and then you realize you're hungry. And
that was amazing. That peckish, and I love the peckish, Pinochet, pointless. I don't just mean the P's. That's fine, the sound kind of rhythms and rhymes, but I think it's just the everydayness of it, and us as being watchers, couch watchers, or seated watchers to what's happening, and at the same time acknowledging there was something I found quite profound about, as I keep mentioning it, the chilly double dip as your eyes caught the presenter, and then that playing with the mute off, mute on. How much can you stand of this? I just thought it was brilliant. I absolutely loved that poem, and I think you watching Pointless is a bit of a joke now in the class. We were waiting for your next watching of Pointless, but the thing is, the subject matter you've got round about it, and the person, the narrator, makes anything but pointless. That's the joke. That's the real gift of these poems that you've written, because Pointless is no longer pointless when you've got a narrator that's yourself, or the writer or the narrator of your poems, drawing us back to some of these very, very important things that history's moving on, So thank you for that.
Yeah, we're recording this, so for the record, Pointless is on in the background. I'm not really watching it, but I protest too much. But I think also when I'm sure I'm not alone in this, if you're not sure what you're going to put on the piece of paper in front of you, you look around and your mind wanders onto what you're actually doing in your everyday life or whatever. Yes.
Thank you very much. Can we move on and hear another one of your poems, Johnny? It would be wonderful just to hear another one.
Yeah.
I'll just hand over to you.
Okay. I can't resist but just say how much I enjoy poetry, because this is a relatively new experience to me since I retired, and it's not just the poetry. It's what I get prompted to read about and learn about that I wouldn't have otherwise. I just think, why would I have ever learnt about two German expressionist painters, August Mack and Franz Marc? But I'll move on to the poem very quickly. But basically, the following four young, talented people died in the Great War. Edward Thomas, August Mack, was German, Wilfred Owen, and Franz Marc, the German, all died tragically young. And this is the resultant poem, which is called This Corner of a Field Forever. This corner of a field forever, England, where red, white, and blue neighbor red, black, and gold, that grave-looking grass, forever Deutschland. Edward Thomas, from Adelstrock to Arras for his early final stand, bowing out, burrowing down into green, pleasant land in this corner of a field, forever England. August Mack, his canvas awaits bold curves, luminous paints. He'll never know the Bauhaus. He sleeps below the grass, forever Deutschland. Wilfred Owen, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. That line school children understand, but forget it's a lie. Lies in this corner of a field, forever England. Franz Marc, a lazy, routine, mundane, everyday shell, in bright blue sky, yellow background sun, wasted, now buried in a field, forever Deutschland. This corner of a field, forever England, that corner of a field, forever Deutschland, another corner, another field, forever somewhere.
So it sounds to me, you know, again, you could change the flag colours for now or anything, but I think that it's the anti-war rhetoric throughout, and the opposition, forever Deutschland, forever England. But the main thing is, for me, the forever word, the work of these people has gone on and will go on. And they didn't, you know, as you say, died tragically young. And but I think there was a clever use of the bits of the field. It was forward looking at the end to what's going on somewhere, everywhere, forever, it seems. We can't get out of this. But I love the gold as well, you know, it wasn't yellow, it was the gold of the Deutsch flag. But just the tragedy of these people. Apart from thinking about the two painters, why do you think you went down the war route? I mean, you could look at the paintings. I know we did that prompt, and I was very intrigued with what you did. Was it something else you were watching at the time, or?
I suppose I think a lot of poetry, there's a lot of poetry about premature death, war, conflict, and I think my father was in the Second World War in the Royal Artillery and got through that. He spoke about it a lot. And I've got a sort of, I think I'm, if anything, a sort of extreme middle ground person who doesn't like it, is wary of anyone with strong opinions, whatever side, and a sort of naive hope that extremism can be kept at bay. I'm not explaining this terribly well. I get really, I've done a couple of poems about poppies, and I get a bit conflicted about that. And I think my father we became very good friends with a German family, and I suppose I wanted to kind of, as a tribute, celebrate that sort of real life friendship that was fostered between an English family and a German family, and it just reading about the two young men who died from the other side, you know, it's not an original thought, but I couldn't stop myself writing from that.
I know, but it was quite an original. It was an original thing you did with it, because, you know, we were looking at the paintings and painters, and you went there with it. I mean, what do you think? You always wanted to write poetry. You feel it's been something that's been tapping at the door when you were in the workplace or when you were younger? Or?
Well, I think I'm a product of a certain sort of education. So I did enjoy writing, as we called it, composition in English, but rightly or wrongly, I think rightly, because I really enjoyed my work, got channeled into sciences. It was a bit of a thing that to be frank, back then boys did. And so I think then you get on a bit of a treadmill of A levels, medical school, work, and it was lots of people do lots of really demanding jobs, but I never really found the time to express it. But then every now and again, I thought, oh gosh, poetry, it must be wonderful to be able to write poetry. And I was at a family occasion for a cousin's birthday, and one of her sons stood up and said, I'm not going to say a few words, I'm going to read a poem. And he read it, and I thought, wow, that really stuck with me. I thought, that must be wonderful to be able to do that. You don't have to do a big long speech, you just write a poem. And then when I retired, I did had a little bit of interest in history, but it was when I saw you could do a course on poetry, I thought I really want to do that. Yes, it's.
I think you've got the bug now. Do you read? Have you read poetry did you read poetry? I know you had a busy life in your workplace and family and everything, but did you find yourself reading poetry books, or it's all now? It's all since you've retired, you're doing all
shame.
of it.
It's really all. I can hardly remember reading any poetry. It was shameful and almost unbelievable when you protest that, you know, this is I'm catching up for lost time, which is great, because even though I've been retired quite a while now, 6 or 7 years, it's all out there, it's all new. So, you know,
wonderful.
I'm
new life.
You know, I'm not burnt out with it at all. It's the opposite.
Wonderful.
Bring it on.
Wonderful. Well, I hope we'll be doing more work together. And the second book, show us your book.
Book. Right, I'll hold it up to the
yes.
camera. There it goes. It's called Sentimental Fool.
Why did you call it
that? Actually, there's a track on a Roxy Music record called Sentimental Fool. And I think one day I thought, that's you know, it's quite light-hearted. It's not too heavy as a title, and it kind of stuck in my head.
And it works, because we did discuss 3 quite serious poems, I suppose, today, but I know that collection very well, and I know your style, and there are very many what we call now Johnny poems, you know, that we recognise them. They're quite quirky, quite humorous, quite out there. So, and I don't really know many that are sentimental. You might think they are. I'm more thinking it's quite emotional and poignant. But, you know, sometimes people think, oh, a wee bit sentimental, but it's a good title for that book. But you're certainly not a fool, and you're not sentimental. And on it, Johnny, I can't wait for the next book. So I hope you'll be planning one.
I'm planning one, and yes, on the current schedule, they'll be out every time on a 4-year cycle. I'd better get my skates on, but I'll try and bring it forward a bit.
Okay, well, it's been lovely. I know you're going away to play a game of bridge now, or whatever you do with your pals.
Well, yeah, I'm a rather reluctant bridge player, but duty calls.
Good. Well, listen, I'll see you soon, no doubt, and
yeah.
Hope you'll come up and read at one of the events. There's quite a lot of events coming up, so I'll speak to you soon about getting you up to one of them. But I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us today in Poets Time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to say thank you to everyone out there for joining us again. It's been a while, and that was wonderful talking to Johnny Woods. I consider him a friend. I consider him someone who inspires me. I work with people, and it's not me pouring down from a great height into their jugs. It's just people learning from one another. And I have learned a lot from this man, so I'd like to thank him for that. And thank you all for listening in, and we'll see you for the next Poets Time. So thank you.